I am so excited to have here with me Steve Olsher, best-selling author of What's Your What, and also creator of Reinvention Radio, which has been seen in some pretty cool mainstream media. That's not what we're here to talk about, but some cool mainstream media as seen on Forbes and CNN and, of course, TED. Steve, thank you so much for your time coming and chatting us here today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Now, we're going to be chatting about new media. So we weren't going to be chatting about mainstream media. So tell us about new media. And for those that have been living under a rock, what that is, what that means.
Yeah, so, new media basically is kind of the antithesis of everything that is broadcast media or old media, if you will. So we're talking about pull media, which is basically where people pull the content that they want when they want it and on their preferred device. So we're talking about audio. That could be live audio, that could be recorded audio, right? So like podcasting would be recorded audio, live audio would be like blog talk radio or something like that. Video, again, recorded or live. Recorded would be like YouTube or Vimeo or Vivo or one of those. And of course, live video is Facebook Live or YouTube Live, etc. Then we've got social media. And of course, you know, the usual suspects in that. We've got mobile, which are apps, right? And then we've got blogging. So that could be the written word in blogging, or that can be video blogging. So audio, video, mobile, blogging, and social media. That's when we're talking about new media, that's specifically what we're talking about.
I mean, I think what sometimes people don't realize is that they are their own publishing platform now. You can be your own publisher. And it really is a unique time. I mean, you know, going back many years, you know, you did solely have to rely on mainstream media, trying to just get into magazines, newspapers, and on TV. And you relied on other publishers' platforms. But we are, in fact, now our own publishers. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think they're just sharing content on Facebook or Facebook Live or Instagram or YouTube, but they might not actually realize the power that they have of that engine, of that publishing engine. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are the media. I mean, that's just...
And Steve, sorry to interrupt, can you just pull your screen down a little bit? Your mouse just dropped off.
Yeah, no worries. Hold on one second. Oh, you know what? I think it popped up. Hold on. Yeah. Hold on.
I don't want you to just be a talking forehead. We'd like to have...
Yeah, you know what? It fell off of its little stand. What happened.
Awesome.
Yeah, hold on. It fell off of its stand is what happened. So now, just gotta pull that.
Resume recording. So what a lot of entrepreneurs might miss is the publishing powerhouse they have at their own fingertips to create credibility and authority.
Yeah. And so, I mean, look, reality is we are the media. I mean, no matter how we slice it, we are the media to our particular subscribers, our particular followers. And you may have an audience of 100 people. Or you may have an audience of 1 million people, but regardless, there are people out there who turn to you for information or education or entertainment or whatever that might be. And so, yeah, we technically are publishers at this point, and we all have the ability to publish what we want when we want it, and on our preferred device.
Now, I talk about being published, and I'm talking about mainstream media, newspapers, magazines, so forth, but also a new media and social media as a real way to position yourself as an expert. And there's this really interesting phrase in business that there is a race to the bottom, a race to the lowest offer. And a lot of entrepreneurs get caught in that cycle of feeling like perhaps that they need to cut prices or do something to out there, to position themselves to stand apart from their competitor. When in fact, if they had profile and they had that recognition and that authority, it becomes a case of you can't really doctor shop because it's not apples with apples, it's now apples with oranges. Mm-hmm. And so when you have that recognized expertise, that race to the bottom, you can leave that race. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, reality is if you're competing on price, I mean, it's a zero-sum game. You're never going to win. right? So at the end of the day, what I believe you want to do is you want to get yourself out of those commodity-oriented circles where you're not competing on price, because there's always going to be someone who can do it faster, cheaper, even better sometimes than you can. So the only way that you can really combat that is to create your own value and to create your own market, really. And that's super hard for most people to do.
Well, it was, wasn't it? But now there's lots of opportunities to be able to do that, given that we are our own publishers.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, though, I do think that there are some who try to compete with the other quote unquote publishers that are out there. And that's really where you have to simply step up and just create your own way of being, create your own platform, create your own teachings that become difficult for others to compete with. I mean, there are other people out there who teach people how to create a podcast, right? So, that's not something that I aspire to do, teach someone how to create a podcast. I can, but there aren't other people out there doing like the New Media Summit, where they have a chance to meet the world's leading podcasters and pitch them on who they are and what they do and leave the event with bookings in hand, right? So that's one of the ways where we get out of that zero-sum game. It's not just simply a conference where you learn about podcasting. That's just a small part of it.
So tell us about that. It seems like a perfect opportunity to talk about the New Media Summit, which is up and coming.
Yeah, so basically what we've done is, I'm a big believer that conferences, whether they be business conferences or personal development conferences or whatever it might be, I'm a big believer that there has to be a very specific takeaway, something that is tangible, something where when they leave the event, they actually get something out of it that they can apply to their life or their business. And so that's what we've done with the summit, is that takeaway, that tangible benefit is specifically the interviews on those shows. So they will, the attendees will literally have the opportunity to sit down with one-on-one, kind of like a speed dating with the podcasters, if you will, type format, where we'll spend time talking about new media and what it is and how to leverage it, and time talking about how to monetize visibility. But we have a full day that's dedicated solely to one-on-one meetings. And that will allow our folks to leave the event with bookings in hand. So they'll have a tangible takeaway, even if they don't apply anything else.
Yeah. And do you teach them, are you going to teach them how to pitch to the podcasters? I mean, is there a way to get your pitch to stand out above the noise from everyone else who's trying to pitch to a podcast?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we're doing not only pre-event training sessions so that people can hit the ground running when they get to the event, but we're also creating their media one sheet for them, helping them with their hooks, helping them create a clear understanding of what the audience benefits and takeaways are, but also being able to practice their pitch and formulate that pitch and get feedback from me and my team and our community, so that when they get that face-to-face with them, they may still be nervous, but they won't be as nervous.
Yeah. Now that Media One Sheet, that has different names in different countries, and we've got viewers and readers in a variety of countries all around the world. So can you explain to them the significance of being able to leave the event with a Media One Sheet?
Yeah. And that is actually, we're going to do that before the event, right? So we'll help them create that before the event, so that when they get to the event, they actually have something to be able to hand to the people that they'll be meeting with. But it basically is one sheet of paper that creates a synopsis of who you are and what you do and why you'd be a great guest for their show, and of course your contact information and so on. Topics that you cover, audience benefits and takeaways, really helps you to articulate the value proposition and the business proposition that you bring to the table as a potential guest. Yeah,
and this is what all the podcasters are looking for too.
Most of them, with rare exception. I mean, if you're at sort of that Gary Vaynerchuk, type level where you don't have to do much more than just show up, most people will need something that provides a clear understanding of who they are and what they do, for sure.
Yeah. Now tell us about the names that you've got. Tell us about some of the podcasters that people can come and pitch to. You've got some big names there. People should start getting excited.
Yes, I mean, so for this event, we've got people like Nathan Lotka, who has a show called The Top. They were one of the fastest shows to reach 1 million downloads. They now have over 5 million downloads. People like Jeff Brown from Read to Lead has over 2.5 million downloads on his show. Of course, our team from Reinvention Radio will be there. JV Crum from Conscious Millionaire with over 3 million monthly listeners. We'll have people like Michael O'Neill from the Solopreneur Hour, 8 million odd downloads, JJ Flassanes from the Fit to Love podcast. And I mean, we've got 40 podcasters in total, and they all are doing some pretty awesome things.
And so where did the idea for the summit come from? You must have seen a need in the market to connect entrepreneurs with these podcasters directly. This is an industry first, this?
To the best of my knowledge, it is, yeah. Yeah, because we get pitched all the time for people to come on to Reinvention Radio. And there's a lot of people who do it right, and there's a lot of people who don't. And so one of the things that I wanted to make sure of was that if we were going to do something like this, that we taught them the right way to pitch so that they would have the best opportunity to get booked on the shows. But yeah, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, there's no other venue where you can meet one-on-one with all of the podcasters that will be in attendance and have a designated time to get booked on their shows. And of course, visibility is the lifeblood of every business, and there's no easier, faster, better way to gain massive visibility quickly that doesn't cost you anything, right? Other than landing appearances on the world's leading shows. I mean, of course, I'm a big fan of creating your own show, but you can do that later. For right now, leverage the hard work of others, and that's what the event is all about.
I think it's a really significant point. And a lot of people, sometimes they look at, oh, well, I need to create a podcast. That's too hard. I don't have the time, so I'm not going to get started. And it becomes a barrier to entry. But what you're saying is you can't use it as an excuse, because you can do that later. The baby step is you can get your one media sheet. You can get on some podcast shows. You can start getting that credibility and that visibility and that authority. And then you can go and create your own show.
Yeah. And I think that look, reality is it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to create your own TV show if you've watched enough TV shows to know what works, right? Well, it's the same thing with podcasting. You don't want to just jump into creating your own show and having that time, energy, and expense of doing it until you really understand what the shows are all about. So you listen to shows, you appear as a guest on shows, you research shows, and when you're ready, then maybe you create your own.
Well, that's true. I mean, when you get interviewed on podcasts, it's interesting to see how the different podcasters do it. And if you haven't been interviewed on a podcast before, just the content that you get prior to that, the surveys that they often send you, the bios that they often want, additional questions that they sometimes send, and the booking links, just seeing the style that the different podcasters have and the pre-interview requirements they have is training in itself, and very valuable business advice for you should you be wanting to set up your podcast, because you can look at what each of the podcasters send you and cherry pick what would work for you.
Yeah, it's it's a fine line between creating something that is uniquely yours and doing something that is completely outside of the scope of what the industry norms are. Now, for us, we're kind of on the outskirts of things because we actually do ours as a live radio show first, and we then repurpose that show into various podcast segments. And so that's not how a lot of people do this, but it works for us. And so that's something that might work for you too. But when you talk about the different ideas that you get from watching and participating in other, in basically consuming the content of others, you're going to pick up some things that you really like and find some things that you might do differently. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And look, I'm, my background obviously is in mainstream media, and I'm very, very huge about the story component of, although we're talking about, your event, there's some content that I'd like to dive into about that, so that people can understand what they're going to get from the event, and also just add some great value for our watchers and also for our readers. So you talked about, it's all about the sizzle behind the story, and the story behind the event. And I want to dive into how you came to get started and what you're doing. But before I do, you mentioned when they come to the summit, they're going to be learning about what not to do. Could you share with us 2 or 3 of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make when they are pitching to a podcaster?
Yeah, I'll just share with you the biggest one, which is making it all about themselves, right? In terms of everything being me or everything being I. And the host or the producer, the decision maker, they don't really care about who you are and what you've done. I mean, it's nice to have the credentials, but the credentials aren't mandatory. I mean, as long as you focus on the value that you bring to the audience and the benefits and the takeaways that they'll realize from hearing you, that's where the magic truly is. And that's hard to do. I mean, a lot of people spend all of their time talking about me, and I, and all the things that I've done. Very few focus specifically on the audience. And if you can do that, that's going to go a long way towards a host or a producer or, a decision maker saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We'd love to have you on the show.
So we're talking exactly about the same thing. It's about that story behind it. And Stephen Covey's quote, start with the end in mind, comes to mind. If you're pitching to a mainstream news outlet, you need to make sure that your pitch matches what their audience would want to consume. And if you're pitching to a podcaster, you would also want to make sure that what you are pitching is relevant and of benefit and value to the subscribers to that podcast. And what a lot of people do in mainstream media, and from what you're saying in podcasts and new media, is there's still this huge gap between just wanting to promote and get free PR and free promotions without recognizing the requirements of the demographic of the listeners, the watchers, the viewers, and tweaking and making sure you get that pitch right for them. Because when you have the right pitch, when you share that content, when you share that story or those tips or whatever it is, then you end up getting the podcast and you get to promote yourself. Whereas if you come in first and it's all about me, and you're trying to promote, you're not going to get what you want. But if you switch it around and you come in with the content and the story and the relevance and the value for that podcast, then you're going to ultimately get what you wanted in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, reality is most of the time people come to us who want to be on the show, who have just heard of the show, but haven't even really listened to an episode to find out if it's even a good fit for them. And that's that's a big mistake. You want to make sure that you listen to the show, that you're aligned with the host, that you have the same degree of integrity and you stand for the same things, and don't get blinded by the numbers, which is really easy for a lot of people to do. So that's another mistake that I certainly see a lot of people make, is they don't come in with an understanding of what that show actually is about, believe it or not.
So just a very simple tip there, just to listen to an episode or two, to do a bit of homework. I mean, you don't go into a job interview without researching the company. And it's kind of like a job interview, isn't it? It's like a pre-interview interview to get on the show, but people are coming in without having done their homework.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. The other thing that happens that is on the flip side of the coin is when we see that somebody actually has listened to the show by saying in their pitch, hey, I listened to episode 238, and in that episode you talked about X, Y, or Z, and that really meant a lot to me because of ABC's story. It just shows that you've done your homework, and you can also position it from the standpoint of the guest that you had on answered that question with this, and here's how I would answer that question. And so it puts them in the mindset of, okay, now I'm back in that interview. I'm remembering what happened. I'm remembering what was said. And okay, yeah, that makes sense in terms of how you would have answered that question. And that'll just give them a sense of like, yeah, maybe this person would be a good guest.
Yeah, awesome. And you mentioned people get distracted by the numbers. Tell us what you mean by that.
I mean, the best example is like Howard Stern in his prime. You know, Howard Stern would reach millions of people. And reality is, he may not have been your cup of tea, but a lot of people just saw that he would reach millions of people. So they kind of swallow their pride, swallow their integrity to be a guest on that show and subject themselves to that crudeness, simply because they wanted to gain the benefit of those metrics, right? And so that's a good example of, well, maybe we're not so aligned and maybe the metrics don't matter. And in my way of thinking, the metrics really don't matter. You're better off being on a show with 1,000 loyal listeners than you are on a show, that might have 100,000 listeners who may not necessarily be interested in your particular subject. So, again, it has to be aligned.
Yeah, so that would come to engagement. I mean, if in the online space, we talk about, engagement with people on your list, and what you're talking about there is a very similar thing. It's better to be on a show with 1,000 loyal, engaged listeners than it is also in your niche avatar, in your core customer or influencer demographic, than it is to be on a show with impressive analytics but very little engagement, and perhaps not ideally in your target market.
Yeah. And again, that's where people get caught up in those vanity metrics, is they just feel like, oh man, I have to be on, one of those shows that reaches a lot more people, when in reality, 1,000 listeners who may be very much aligned with your message can ultimately be, as I said, much more powerful than 100,000 who may just have kind of a general interest in that arena, as opposed to a specific interest in that, in that subject.
Now, how do you leverage your podcast? How do you, can you put some logos on your website as seen on or in? What's the best way to leverage this to position yourself as an authority?
I mean, if you've been a guest on shows, that certainly makes sense, because today's leading podcasts are every bit as formidable in terms of credibility and authority as ABC and NBC and Fox. So that would certainly be one way to do it, is to use those logos and, as featured on, and yeah, those are going to carry a lot of weight. But it's also easier to get booked on other shows when you've been a guest on shows, right? I mean, it's the visibility begets more visibility. And so you want to let people know that you've been a guest on other people's shows as well, if you have, sure.
Yeah, when you're pitching to them.
Yeah.
And there'll be flow-on effects too for speakers. If you've when you're putting your speakers pack together, for those who are watching, who are speakers, if you've been on a podcast show, that's also going to help event organizers in knowing that you can string a few sentences together, and have decent sound bites to then be able to present in front of a live audience. So there could be some leveraging to position yourself to be an attractive speaker as well. So there would be multiple uses that you could reuse and recycle those podcast appearances for. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a credibility, it's an authority play. And anytime you can tack on more credibility, more authority, you're going to increase the likelihood of getting new clients, of selling more products, programs, and services, of getting booked on additional shows. Yeah, I mean, it's an ascending spiral for sure.
Now, do you see a lot of noise out there in the market, and podcasts being crucial to cutting through, or new media, maybe not specifically just podcasts, but how do you see new media as being a machine or an engine to cut through the amount of noise out there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I do very little marketing at all outside of having my own podcast and appearing as a guest on other people's shows, because honestly, nothing provides a better return. And with email rates, diminishing in terms of the open rates diminishing, with Facebook ads getting more and more expensive to be able to get people to take action. You can look at some of the old school tactics like direct mail and and radio or television advertising, and that becomes very cost prohibitive. So I don't see anything out there now that comes even close to the ROI you get from having your own show or appearing on other people's shows. There's nothing better in terms of lead generation, and more specifically, highly targeted lead generation, and then very poignant lead generation conversations, enrollment conversations that then turn into real revenue. So yeah, I think you're having a tough time beating that as a medium right now for an ROI on your marketing initiatives, for sure.
So how did you get into doing what you were doing?
Long story. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for the better part of 25 years, and started out in the nightclub world and got into real estate and catalogs and .coms and you name it over the years. I think that I've done it. The reality is, we launched on CompuServe's electronic mall in 1993. So I've been online for almost 25 years. And over those years, I mean, I've tested virtually every online marketing strategy you can think of, from SEO to AdWords to YouTube and social media. I mean, you name it, I've done it. And reality is, once I started my podcast back in 2009, and then have kind of danced on and off with it for a while, and then mostly on now for the better part of the last 3 years, I just found that everything else fell by the wayside in terms of the results that I was getting. It just nothing came even close. And so I've always had a love for radio. I love talking to people. I love interviewing people. And so podcasting was just a natural next step, a natural sort of evolution of some of the things that I had done on radio early on.
And how have you seen podcasting change over that time frame?
You know, I'm not going to say that it's changed necessarily. I will say that there's just more attention on the medium, and there are different players who have decided to jump into the fray that have helped with visibility and have helped with just kind of raising the perception around the entire medium. You know, once NPR got into the game, National Public Radio got into the game, and then ESPN and and some of the other traditional broadcasters, that's really helped to draw a lot of new listeners, a lot of new eyeballs and eardrums over to the channel. And I will say now that I think that there's less of kind of a basement type feel to the shows and more of a polished production type feel. I mean, Dan Carlin, when he does Hardcore History, I mean, it takes him 6 months to release one episode, which of course is pretty insane. But I think that it's definitely kind of moved out of that basement kind of mentality into an honest to goodness medium that people take seriously.
And where's it going?
It's going into the car. You know, once Wi-Fi hits the car and becomes a standard accessory, and 250 million cars rolling off the assembly line, and once AI and Alexa and Google Home and so on become much more likely to find you the entertainment and the information and the education that you're looking for simply by asking it to find it. And literally on the dashboard of that car, when you have AM and FM and podcasts and satellite and whatnot all next to each other, you're going to find that podcasting is going to have listenership that's really set to explode here pretty quickly.
That sounds like a very exciting opportunity for people. You've got a captive audience in the car. They're trapped. They can't go anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be sitting there listening to your interview. What an amazing and powerful opportunity. Yeah, for sure. It's a really exciting time. I mean, as far as this medium is concerned, and whether it's called podcasting as we move forward, I don't know. It may just shift into some sort of audio definition or something of that nature. But for right now, it's still called podcasting. And just as the number of channels explode in terms of how to be able to access the programming, that's where you start to see some real numbers start come into play. And for that, obviously, the best way, guys, is to get along to the New Media Summit. Okay, like seriously, you're going to get everything you need. Going to get the knowledge that you need to approach the podcasters, the confidence that you need to approach the podcasters. You're going to get the connections that you need to, or you'll have them there in the room. For those that are attending, for those that can't get along to this one, what's some basic tips that you could give them to get started with new media?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said earlier, it's just simply a matter of listening to the shows and start finding the shows that you like. And specifically, I would say find shows that are already in your genre. But at the same token, I do know that if you wait on this, you're going to wish you had gotten started today. You know, reality is, I look at Bitcoin in terms of where Bitcoin is today. And it's insane where those numbers are. I had opened an account to toy around in Bitcoin about 3 years ago, and dug up my old username and password and found it and was hoping I would find this holy grail of Bitcoins just kind of sitting in there. And unfortunately, I had opened the account, but I never actually invested in Bitcoin at that time when it was trading around $4, I think, for a single coin. And now it's over $4,600. So I wish I had put 10 grand into it at that point. That would have been a good thing. But reality is it's the same thing with podcasting. I mean, you can sit back and you can listen to other people's shows and so on. But I think that the real power is actually just getting into the game. And I would say certainly sooner rather than later.
And I just want to address one of the barriers that sometimes come up. I know in video, people go, oh, I don't have the gear and I don't have this and I don't have that. And I would imagine in podcasting, there would be some people who go, oh, but I don't have this and I don't have that. What do you need to get started? What are the minimum requirements to get started with a podcast?
There are no minimum requirements, really. I mean, because now you have things like Anchor, which is an app you can download onto your phone. And so you can create an entire episode right there on your phone. If you want to do an interview, you can use Skype and Call Recorder to record the conversations, or Zoom, or any of those platforms. There really is no barrier to entry now. I mean, there really is no excuse now from a technology standpoint. You can use your phone. You don't need a fancy microphone. You can use Skype to record interviews. You can use iTunes, which is a free platform. You'll need a host to host your audio files, which frankly is less than $10 a month, pretty inexpensive. And there's no technological barrier to entry at this point. It's very much accessible to everyone.
So there you go, folks. You need no gear to get started. You can start doing some homework and having a look at podcasts. Make sure you match your message and your story with the audience of the podcaster and do a bit of homework into that. And of course, get along to New Media Summit. Now, tell us when that is, Steve, and where it's being hosted.
So the New Media Summit is taking place September 22nd through the 24th in San Diego. And not sure how many tickets we have left. I know it's under 30. It may actually be under 20 at this point, but newmediasummit.net is the address for that site.
Well, I think there's going to be some very upset people then. So how do they come? And congratulations on an already very successful event. For those who miss out, if you snooze, you lose, guys. How do they then come and connect with you to find out what you're doing, listen to your show, grab your book? What is the best channel to connect, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, Reinvention Radio is certainly a great place to start. Check out the show, see what you think of that.
You have some epic interviews on there, by the way, guys. So you seriously have to go and have a look and check out the heavyweights that Steve has on his show.
Yeah, thanks. There's been some great people on. So Reinvention Radio is a great place to start. And if you like the show and you want to connect on a more personal level, then Steve Olsher, OLSHER.com would certainly be the next place to go.
And content, if they wanted to give you a pitch, Steve, what would be your tip for their positioning in that? I'm being very cheeky, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I'll be cheeky right back, because it's like, you want to meet me, you want to meet our team from Reinvention Radio, you come to the New Media Summit and you can pitch us in person, and you can pitch our team, and you can pitch 39 other shows and learn how to pitch them the right way and learn how to monetize the visibility that you'll receive when you do it.
And I love that. And you can be cheeky. Guys, Steve can be cheeky. Guess what? He has authority. He has a credibility. He has positioning. And he has all of that because he's a giant in that new media world. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is using new media, using the power of podcasts and new media to create authority, to cut through that noise, to be seen and heard above everybody else and become the true authority in your field. So, I'm so excited. I can't thank you enough, Steve. Did you have any final comments that you wanted to share?
I would just simply say once again that if you are thinking about this and you've been at least contemplating the idea of either being a guest on a show or starting your own show, then I would say there's really no better time than the present, because you're going to watch time kind of slip away here if you don't get started, and you're going to regret not getting started. So even if you don't know what you're doing, and none of us really do, you just jump in and you do what you can do, and you start with some smaller shows and try to get on some smaller shows first, and you work your way up to the larger shows. But in terms of your own show, you just simply hit record and you start, and wherever you go, you go. But you'll get that first show under your belt, which will make the second one easier, and the third one even easier, and so on. So it's just a natural progression down the path of being comfortable with what you're doing.
Yeah, and that really excites me. I know from a mainstream media point of view, I used to love it when, my clients were on radio, and I still love it now. And the reason I love it is because you literally have a captive audience. They're stuck in traffic. They've got nowhere to go. They're not going to jump out of the car when it's moving. Yeah. And I sort of think about Doctor Who's time traveling telephone booth. And now you're going to have people stuck in this time traveling promotion booth, listening to your promotional message. I mean, what an incredible, I can just see it just going ballistic, just kapow with the power of the podcast.
Mm-hmm. And look, reality is, and none of us hold a crystal ball. I don't know what will happen, but I think that the odds are good that this is moving in the right direction for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm going to put the links up so you can connect with Steve. I would hustle if I were you. If there's only 20 or 30 tickets left, there's no time to snooze, because you will lose. An amazing opportunity. Congratulations on putting together, an amazing event. And I hope that this is going to be an annual event. No pressure, Steve. But
right. Yeah, we'll do what we can.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your time. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
My pleasure.